We had an example recently where we had a bunch of PDF documents in our search index. It was really critical to the client that the items get added to the index once they get created, like immediately. Mm-hmm. So we leveraged the push API to push new items and updates to items in real time, well, relatively real time, right? Development. And then at the end of the night, we did a full index rebuild using the REST API. So we leveraged both in the same scenario.
Welcome, and thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Sitecore Water Cooler, the casual conversation podcast dedicated to covering all things related to Sitecore, including product updates, implementation insights, getting the most out of your Sitecore investment, and more. I'm your co-host today, Maggie Burke, Sitecore Operations Director and Sitecore MVP at AmericanEagle.com. Search is a pivotal aspect of any online experience. We live in a day and age of instant gratification, and users have an expectation of being able to easily navigate their way to the answers they are looking for. The more simplistic this is made for your users to do, the more enhanced of a digital experience they can have and ultimately act on the conversions you are looking for them to do. This adds an exciting but complex layer for marketing and technical users alike when implementing a search solution for their organization. We've talked on this podcast before about the planning considerations to make, but today we'll be diving deeper into the setup and implementation of Sitecore Search. We are joined today by Senior Sitecore Solution Architect and Sitecore Search expert Jared Arnofsky and Senior Sitecore Account Manager Casey Stanutz, who have both been involved and pivotal in our Sitecore Search implementations over the last few years to provide their insight. Jared, Casey, welcome to the Water Cooler.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thanks for having us.
All right. So first and foremost, we've obviously talked about kind of planning considerations that we should be making for Sitecore Search, but I guess I'd like to kind of understand what is the very first step that a business should be making before they're going to kind of dive into the setup and implementation. You know, they acquire the licensing that they need to actually implement Sitecore Search. They, go through all of those aspects, but now it's like, okay, they're working with either their internal team or their partner to go ahead and implement Sitecore Search. What's the first step that they should be really looking at?
I think a big thing that every organization should look into is what content do you want to index? And that's the biggest thing is you have content from multiple different sources and external systems. And I think just figuring out what you want to have show up in search and then be able to kind of define maybe the different types or what types of content you're going to show in your search platform. I think that's the biggest thing.
And I think that's another point to make too with Sitecore Search is that it doesn't actually have to be content that's served up in Sitecore, correct? I mean, they can go through and do external sources, which is a really powerful thing to be able to do because, when we look at some of the clients that we work with that are acquiring businesses and things at all aspects of the year, being able to actually pull content from something that doesn't actually live within their Sitecore CMS or wherever it is a powerful thing to be able to do, to index that stuff at, real time kind of situations. So is that something that like clients and businesses can look at as well as not only mapping out what sources you want to index, but also looking at what external sources you want to index as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think looking at internal and external sources is exactly where you need to look. And you can even look beyond that. If there was even maybe a third party that has some type of article or informational data that you want to index back into your site, you can pull that too. Mm-hmm. So there's a million different possibilities of pulling in different types of sourced content into Sitecore Search.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I'd also add in, like, we've done entire implementations where there weren't any websites in Sitecore, right? Where we had like 8 sources, maybe proprietary CMSs, custom code, Salesforce, and we might pull in 8 sources, and none of those are in Sitecore.
Which is a great point to make because I think as we continue to talk through these composable products, it's a great point to highlight that, again, businesses can acquire and purchase licensing for Sitecore Search, and they do not have to be on Sitecore to be able to use that product and to be able to leverage that product. So kind of planning ahead for that aspect of it, you don't have to think, oh, we need to be, purchasing all of these different Sitecore products to make sure that they work together. They can run agnostically, and it doesn't need to necessarily rely on one tech stack. So Very exciting. Another thing that I think is important to talk about, again, I know we touched on this a little bit before in the last podcast, but when we're talking about planning for the sources, is there validity in planning for the taxonomy and facets, I imagine, as well? Like once you kind of identify the sources that you want to use, now it's talking through, okay, how do we want to actually go about tagging those sources and making sure that the taxonomy is set up in a way that's easily faceted and easily filtered for users to go through. So is that kind of an important aspect that they should be planning for as well?
Yeah. I think pre-planning what you want your filters and your facets to be allows kind of that planning aspect and the implementation of it to make it that much easier. So you're not having to really dive into all the attributes and every single thing that you're going to need to index within your search tool. You can get some of that pre-planned and done ahead of time versus having to do it all during implementation.
Laying down the groundwork for standardizing that across like many sources, like how you're going to show those fields in your markup, in your HTML, etc. Like anything that you can do ahead of time and plan out and agree upon before you get into implementation, would be real beneficial to your timeline and in the project.
Yeah. Always good to stay on that timeline. I think it's also important too, because it allows you to kind of build that almost matrix and understand a little bit more about your taxonomy and make sure that the kind of nomenclature that you're using and that the values that you're using in your taxonomy are similar across the board, because it kind of creates that continuity and ease of use for business users that's going to be actually utilizing and leveraging the search tool on your platform, and making sure that, again, it's a taxonomy that kind of makes sense and spreads across maybe multiple sources, and it's not going to be different per source because, again, it just allows for that continuity and kind of streamlined search experience. So great. So obviously there, as we've talked about, there's an abundance of different sources that you can do. Can you guys tell me a little bit more about the different types of sources that someone might come across or someone might identify when they're going through this kind of planning out?
Yeah.
For Sitecore Search.
And when we're talking about types of sources, Sitecore Search they have a web crawler, they have an advanced web crawler. The web crawler and the advanced web crawler allow content to be crawled from like a starting point or an endpoint. So you can supply a sitemap URL or supply some API endpoint of an index of maybe it's products, maybe it's pages, maybe it's documents. And that can kind of be your starting point to get all of those things indexed and crawled into Sitecore Search. And then you also have the REST API and the push API sources that allow you to do a little bit more customization of those sources, whether it's additional attributes, additional content that you want to pull in via an API. And then the REST API just gives you kind of that endpoint where you can call that endpoint whenever that content is updated or changed. You're able to index it again.
Great. And I think another thing too, when you're talking through these different types of sources and kind of like what you're pulling through, like again, versus, like documents versus articles versus whatever it is, I think another consideration to make again is not only when you are looking at search itself, but also how you want the results to show up, and thinking through that, especially in the design phase, because I think that's one thing too that if you're not thinking about, okay, like some of these results are going to have a title, an image, a description, but some might not have images. So how do we plan accordingly to make sure that the different types of sources and results cards that we're going to have show up on search? I think it's another way to think about when it comes to planning is how do we want these to show up and what information do we need to make sure show up in our result cards? And is that going to be a consistent experience throughout, or do we need to have different result card showings for the different types that might be showing up as well? So I think that's another aspect of the planning. But I guess when we're talking through different ways of pulling the sources, like, are there things to consider or think through in terms of when you want to use a web crawler versus the REST API? Jared, that might be something that you can kind of tap in on from a technical aspect.
Yeah, sure. So there's different types of crawlers. So there's a web crawler, there's an advanced web crawler. If you have just a sitemap and you just need to point it at a web crawler, very simple. That would be like scenario one. If you need something a little bit more advanced, say you have some security or bot protection on your website, you need to pass some headers or some keys or some security values, we could look at using an advanced web crawler. An advanced web crawler also lets us handle like multiple languages and locale settings and stuff like that. So it's a pretty good one to use, the advanced web crawler. And then when we're talking about APIs, we might want to use the REST API. REST API example would be, say you want to import all of your doctors into a doctor search. Maybe you have a third-party system that is an API of doctor data that you host, and Sitecore Search could crawl that. But you could also use a push API. Perhaps you want your development team to push that data directly into Sitecore Search rather than using a REST API. So that could be another example. So it's really flexible of what you could want and what you can use. And you might even have a scenario where you want to do both. So we had an example recently where we had a bunch of PDF documents in our search index. It was really critical to the client that the items get added to the index once they get created, like immediately. Mm-hmm. So we leveraged the push API to push new items and updates to items in real time, or relatively real time, right? Because it's development. And then at the end of the night, we did a full index rebuild using the REST API. So we leveraged both in the same scenario.
Okay, that's great. So it's nice to know that, it could be a single scenario, but there is multiple ways that you can kind of tackle it to make sure that it fits the business case. So
yeah,
great. Yeah, very flexible.
And I think another consideration to add on to that is just the amount of data that you're wanting to index or bring in. That may influence what type of source you're using as well. It's just the sheer amount of what is in your index and how long that's going to take to rebuild, so on and so forth.
Yeah, valid point, because obviously performance is going to be something that's key too. So if there is going to be some kind of considerations or impacts there just based on sheer amount, it's good to kind of plan ahead for that. So that's a very good point. Great. So I guess talking through the different types of sources and things like that are important. But now once that stuff has been identified and kind of planned out, and then again, we've talked through planning out some of the taxonomy and facets, and then again, just kind of look and feel necessarily for the different result cards that you might have. All of that stuff is planned out. Now let's talk a little bit more about the technical side of it, which is creating that source. So Jared, can you talk to us a little bit about, okay, now that we've identified the source that we want to index, what does it entail to actually creating that source?
Yeah, first we would want to determine what the most suitable use case would be for our specific source situation.
Yeah, and I think leading into that too, that will help you go in and decide, do I want to use the advanced web crawler? Do I want to use the web crawler? Either the REST API, the push API. So you want to select that source type, and then you can go into all the different use cases that you're going to need based on those sources. Then you're going to create various triggers, and the triggers kind of help direct the crawler, find where that specific content is. And then the triggers can be configured with multiple URLs, a single URL, or even a sitemap URL.
Yeah, and you can go so far with triggers as there's JavaScript triggers that you can do as well too. So we had an interesting use case where we needed to get a bunch of metadata from PDFs, and those PDFs lived in a table, an HTML table. So we leveraged a JavaScript trigger to crawl that table. There's thousands of rows, and we had some logic in there to figure out, what row is in what language, and how to get that data. So you have the flexibility of doing, something really simple like a sitemap trigger that looks at a sitemap index trigger. Say you have 15 different sitemaps, maybe one for each different language on your site, and you want to put them all together. But then you can extend it and use a JavaScript trigger and put logic in there and do whatever you need to do to get that data.
Yeah. And then next you would go in, you would configure those crawler settings so you could define and control what content is being indexed. So whether you're pulling back a title, pulling back description, meta information, you can start to define some of those attributes that are going to define your data and define your index. And then you can also start to then configure your document extractors. The document extractors kind of help determine what content attributes you're actually going to use and need within your specific search results and your search items on the page.
And the document extractor it uses Cheerio.js. It's just a lightweight library that's made to parse markup in HTML. So, as long as from a development perspective, you're exposing your metadata and markup in a standard way across your sources, across your data, it's relatively straightforward to code that in Sitecore Search to extract that data.
So that's great. I guess in terms of setting up different languages in your, Sitecore Search implementation, are there certain ways that when you're creating a source, you want to kind of think about that or go through that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Sitecore Search allows you to define locales at the domain level for the project, and then per source you can have a locale extractor. If you don't have a locale extractor, you can hard code it to one locale. So say English is the only language you're doing, you would just have it hard coded to English. But if you want to have more than one language, you can have a locale extractor. And then essentially how it would work is in your extractor, look at the meta tag to figure out what your language is, right? That could be an example. So just another point in your extractor, the locale extractor would run and find out what your language is. And then when we index stuff in Sitecore Search, we would have consistent ID across all languages, and then it would see that there's a different language code, and then pull the extracted values in that language or that page into that version of that language in the index.
So it sounds like once you actually identify the source and then you're going through and creating it, there really is kind of a step-by-step process, it sounds like, right?
Yep. Yeah. So you're going to define that source type. You're going to create your triggers. You're going to configure those crawler settings. You're going to set up those different document extractors like we talked about. If there's a multilingual aspect, look into the locale extractor. And then at the end, you're going to really start to customize the content attribution. So whether that's making certain data and certain metadata available for filtering and facets, or making them sortable, defining that kind of customized level that you need within your index to be able to further pare down your search results pages. That kind of allows you then to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the content attribution of all your results in your index.
All right. So I guess we've talked about obviously identifying the different sources. And then we started talking through, okay, now once you have identified, here's actually the step-by-steps to creating a source. So once the teams have kind of gone through those exercises and things are set up, now we can kind of talk through actually configuring the pages, right? And creating kind of that search experience for their users. So when we talk through some of the features that maybe Sitecore Search has that are either out of the box and then can be extended, what are some of those like search widgets and components that do come with Sitecore Search that might be exciting for a business user or marketing user?
Yeah. So you have the preview search widget, which that kind of allows you to automate a little bit of additional content within your search results or what indexers are coming back within that index. It could also be based on spelling or an autocorrection. So if you know a certain word is always spelled wrong, you can obviously with search experiences, you see that autocomplete and trying to kind of help the user out and to find what they're looking for. Also, the search results widget, where it's just displaying your search results on the page. That's another component or widget that comes with it. There's also a recommendation widget, which allows you to get a little bit more personalization and control over what recommendations a user may see, or they can kind of see additional documents, additional content, additional products that may be related to what they're searching for. And it kind of displays them and allows them to be able to, I want to go look at that next kind of thing.
Okay. So it sounds like there's machine learning aspect to it as well, that like if the recommendations engine is kind of picking up like what users are seeing and things like that, there's that aspect there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Like I said, personalization is always a buzzword. So it's kind of one of those things that's great that there's an element of that even just coming straight out of the gate with Sitecore Search. So no, that's great, especially when we talk a little bit about obviously some things being out of the box, but of course they have to be, sometimes extended and whatnot. So Jared, looking over to you in terms of just kind of level of effort around a Sitecore Search implementation and things like that, could you kind of give us maybe a, high level end to end what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. So Sitecore Search it's pretty flexible. They have a couple routes for like implementation that they recommend. You could use their API. And in our scenario, in this specific example, we're talking about implementing Sitecore Search in like a Next.js application, right? So you could leverage the API and make your own components. But Sitecore also has a JS SDK for React. So they have a library of components and things that are already pre-built. They also let you leverage the CLI that they've made. So you can go to your project and run a couple of CLI commands, and all of your components can be built out for you. In a couple minutes. You might have to do a little bit of refactoring, or you can extend them and stuff and make them custom to what you want. But they also have a storybook page up with all of their components on it as well. So you can go there, see what they have, take it directly, modify it, extend it, etc. But Sitecore has really built like a nice tool set for headless applications, and specifically with React and giving us what we need. So if you're going to use the JS SDK, your implementation to get the basic implementation without styling and stuff like that is pretty fast. You can get it done pretty quickly, and then focus on how do you want to extend it and then style it and stuff after that.
Great, which is good to hear, because again, sometimes you do need to just get like an MVP out the door, and knowing that you can do that quickly and always set up for kind of a prioritized phase 2 and fast follows is good to hear. But I think your point as well about having kind of that storybook kind of listing of, here's your framework, here's what you have already out of the gate. So this is like, it's almost allowing users to not necessarily have a green field to start with, because sometimes that can be overwhelming. It's again giving you that framework and that foundation to start with, and then you can figure out kind of where you might want to extend and what will make the most sense for the use cases that your organization has. So that's always good to hear. So I think one of the best things about Sitecore, and one of the kind of areas of expertise that they have, is that they've really built around this kind of learning community as well, right? So they have training modules, they have different courses that can be taken for specializations, and they have different learning courses as well. And I think it's important to note that it's, for technical and marketers alike. So it's not always specific to just technical users, but there are certain things that marketers and business users that are going to be using these Sitecore products can do. And one of the biggest ones that they just released was the Sitecore Search learning course. And I know, Casey, you actually had an opportunity to be one of the first kind of users of the learning course. So would love to hear a little bit from you on just kind of how that learning course went, certain things that you feel like were like optimal to see, and just kind of, again, giving us a high level look of going through that, course level.
Yeah. I had the pleasure of being a beta tester for that certification course. So it was great to be able to see things, obviously, before they went live, before they went out to the public. We were able to provide great feedback. We were able to kind of have conversations with the team members, with the learning team, and just say, hey, maybe this didn't really convey what really is happening behind the scenes in Sitecore Search, or that may be too specific and too technical for a normal business user. Because that's what this learning course was, specific for business users, and kind of that business user, and how do you work on Sitecore Search, and how you can implement it with a developer, without a developer, and what you can kind of utilize inside of the platform to kind of tailor your search and your search experience. Mm-hmm. The biggest thing I think I loved was just being able to provide that feedback to the team and be able to kind of hear validation, and even see with some of the others. I knew a couple other people that were doing the course with me that were also beta testers. So we were able to kind of give feedback to each other. We were able to pass it to the learning team, and it was an overall great experience. And at any time Sitecore has any type of beta user testing, they're letting users know, and that use the platform, partners, clients, implementation partners. So I think overall it's a great thing that Sitecore does for the community. Mm-hmm. And it also is it's a great way to get certified in some of these courses that they're coming out with too.
Definitely. Yeah, it just sounds extremely collaborative, right? Like it's allowing for people that they know are going to actually be using these products, and not only just using them, but of course, again, implementing them. And And are also working with clients day in, day out, and, have an understanding of maybe some of the strengths and weaknesses that clients will see when they're trying to learn how to use these products. So again, making sure that it's not just seeing it from one view and kind of tunnel vision, it's getting feedback from multiple different sources. Again, whether it's clients, implementation partners, et cetera. It just makes it feel very collaborative, and I think is a very strong point for why these learning courses go over so well. So I'm glad you had such a good experience with that.
Yeah.
Thinking about it from the marketing and business user perspective, because again, we've talked about the fact that, of course, Jared's on here. We've got the technical side of it, and it's one of those things that it's always important to learn about Sitecore Search or any of the Sitecore products from a technical perspective. But we do work with marketers and business owners day in, day out as well. So it's always exciting to kind of see these products from that vision too. And because you went through the learning course, Casey, I'd love to know, just as a final wrap up, what are some aspects of Sitecore Search that you think would really get marketers and business users excited about using that product?
I think having the control over some of the search results, being able to go in and maybe change and customize your attribution, being able to add different attributes, or even just weight those things, being able to weight your title of your item over maybe the description, because you may have a description of something that has the keyword in it about 150 times, but it may be more so that the title of this specific article or this title of this document is more important. And so we want to weight that a little bit higher in the search results. But then also simple things like being able to set up synonyms, being able to set up things inside having something as powerful as the recommendations widget and being able to extend that and build upon that with your development team, or just using the recommendations widget as is. I think there's just a lot of powerful tools that come with Sitecore Search in and out of the box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, it just goes back to empowering that business user and that marketer, to not always feel like they have to rely on their development teams to make any little change. And I think search specifically, you learn a lot of analytics and things like that come back from search results and things of that nature that can really enhance, to go back to my original point, it's going to enhance that digital experience regardless on your site. And it's a critical kind of point on your website. So allowing marketers and business users to be able to make those updates without necessarily having to rely and wait time and things like that for a development team to make those changes and configurations, I feel like is a really powerful aspect. So
100%.
Great. Okay. Jared, Casey, thank you both for joining us at the water cooler today. I look forward to collaborating with you guys in the future, and we hope to have you back on the water cooler again soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Maggie.
Thanks for listening to the Sitecore Water Cooler podcast. Find out more information about AmericanEagle.com's Sitecore services and today's topic in the description below. This episode is brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios. I'm your host, Maggie Burke, and special thanks to our executive producers, Renee Nelson, Julia Klepich, and Brian Wenger.